Good evening. Welcome to the House of Overthinking. It's time for a Wicked breakdown. I'm sure there are many other details, Easter eggs, and changes that could be observed, but these are just the ones that I made notes about the second time I saw Wicked. So here we go. Let's not waste any time. Number 1. This has been pointed out many times, but Elphaba's name was actually created by Gregory Maguire when he wrote Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, and published it in 1995. In creating a name for the Wicked Witch of the West, he took the initials of the author of the original Oz books, Lyman Frank Baum. LFB, Elphaba, Elphaba. Prior to Wicked, the Wicked Witch of the West did not generally have a name. Number 2. Anyone who's seen a stage show will know that the decorations include large gears and clockwork sorts of themes. And this is actually in keeping with the original Oz books, which were quite an interesting fusion of Art Nouveau and steampunk. It captured the sort of technological view of the future that people had in their mind when they went to the Chicago World Fair. That sort of thing was fused with fairyland, and so in Oz, both technology and magic are very welcome. Some of you may remember in Return to Oz, the character TikTok is an early prototype of artificial intelligence, except it's from over 100 years ago, so I think L. Frank Baum was very forward-thinking. Even if you look at the illustrations by John R. Neal, who drew all of the Oz characters from the sequel, The Land of Oz, and onwards, he has a very Art Nouveau touch to his art, as you will see from the art that I am probably putting around my head in post-production. Number 3. Who was the man on horseback riding away from Kiamoko as Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, the Cowardly Lion, and Toto go back to the Emerald City with the Wicked Witch's broom? People have been referring to the man on horseback, but I agree with others who think that it's not a man at all. It's probably Elphaba, but that's getting into spoiler territory, and I will not be covering spoilers here. These observations are just going to be limited to breaking down the first film. Number 4. The issue of accents in Oz is an interesting one for me. Oz is the first great American fantasy world, and so I've always wanted to hear American accents in it. Although Return to Oz had a number of British accents in it because they filmed it in England, I still am a bit of a stickler for an American fantasy world having American accents the same way I don't want to hear American accents in Narnia or Hogwarts. I want those to be British accents. So, bit of a stickler, but I would like the characters in Oz to be largely American. So it was nice to have Glinda and Elphaba with an American accent. Thank you, Cynthia Erivo, for not using your native British voice. But Fiyero, he had to speak in a British accent, and I don't know why that was. Maybe people were attached to the way he sounds in Bridgerton, but again, I would have liked him to sound American. Number 5. Traveling by bubble has a precedent in the original books, as you can see here in this illustration. The wizard, who has since returned to Oz, has been taught some rudimentary magic by Glinda, who was very patient with him. And he is now sending people on their way by bubble. But as you can see, it's not purely magic. He's using machinery. There's a lever, there's some kind of pump generating a bubble around them. So it's not just magic spells. There is this sense that magic and machines go hand in hand in Oz. And it's interesting that they captured that so effectively in Wicked, particularly in in the adaptation we're all here to talk about. Glinda was in a bubble that has a base made by human hands, presumably. So again, we see this fusion of magic and technology. Number 6. Watching the very diverse cast of Wicked makes me realize how incredibly white the cast of The Wizard of Oz is. I mean, when you look at it, it's just very, very white. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Don't come after me. It's just an amusing observation. Number 7. Despite a reasonable proliferation of blue costumes in the crowd at Munchkinland, There isn't as much blue as there really should have been, considering the predominant colour in Munchkinland is supposed to be blue. You have Emerald City in the centre, sporting green, Quadlings in the south are red, the Gillikins in the north use purple, the Winkies in the west are represented by yellow, and Munchkins in the east use blue as their colour. And so there is supposed to be this dominating theme of the colour blue in Munchkinland. It was nice to see a little bit here, certainly more than you got in the original Wizard of Oz, where they were all sorts of different colours to make most of the vibrant Technicolor. But here we just have to make do with a few people being dressed in blue. I guess we'll take what we can get. Number 8. The moment when Jonathan Shu shows that the musical is in extremely competent hands is right at the beginning in No One Mourns the Wicked, when Elphaba's mother is dancing with the man she lets in her door as soon as her husband is gone. And the way that he had them seamlessly moving about, sitting on the piano, I just knew that we were in for a treat. And I think that, I don't know what your moment was when you realized that Wicked was just going to be handled perfectly, but for me, that was it. Number 9. Not only is red often used to denote sensuality, like the tone of Elphaba's mother wearing this fantastically sensual red dress, it was also the colour of the Quadling man who, in the original Wicked book, came to stay with Elphaba and the rest of the Throp family. Except, of course, he started having an affair with Elphaba's mother. She was a little bit inclined to enjoy herself, shall we say. But what made it even saucier is that after a while, Elphaba's father decided to join in, and I gathered that it was just all a bit of a free-for-all, which is why the Book of Wicked is for a slightly higher age bracket than the Wicked musical. Number 10. One theme missing entirely from the musical that is quite strong in the Wicked books is religion. Gregory Maguire, I believe, was raised in a relatively conservative religious home, as many of us were, and he found at some point that conflicted with his orientation. He could no longer be true to himself, and he had to break out on his own to find out who he was. Does any of that journey sound familiar? It probably should. It's interesting, though, that the only reference that he made to alternative orientations in Wicked was to describe a couple of gay characters as inverted men. I've never heard inverted men outside of Wicked, but I quite like it because, we are a bit of a topsy-turvy bunch. But back to my point, Elphaba's father in the original Book of Wicked was not just a political figure, he was also a preacher. He had a religious role in the community, and so that made it even more interesting when he started sleeping with the Quadling man who was staying with them. And there's a considerable amount of tension in the book between the monotheistic religion that has taken over Oz, which very much resembles Christianity, and the pagan religion that observes magic, and the fairy Queen Lurline, which of course is represented very much by talking animals. You can't put that into the musical version, quite obviously. They needed to pick their battles, and I think they picked the right ones. But if you're interested in seeing the tension between paganism and monotheistic religion, there is plenty of that in the original Wicked book. Number 11. There were a few lyrical changes, but some of them stood out quite strongly. One of them was in No One Mourns the Wicked, when they were talking about Elphaba's skin at birth, and rather than saying it's atrocious, they said it's uncanny. I don't know why they chose that. Atrocious to uncanny, does it sound better? I don't know. Maybe there was a reason. Number 12. The other lyric change that really stood out to me was right after the change from atrocious to uncanny, when the father sees the skin color of Elphaba and says green. In the original soundtrack, there's quite a crescendo to that word, and everyone sings it like this. But in the recent, I keep saying this, in the movie version, it's sung very softly and it takes away that sense of impact, like this. Sure, the music does that discordant blare, but it doesn't have everyone singing it. Again, I don't know why they chose it, but it was a choice that stood out quite strongly and probably does to anyone who knows the original musical. Appropriately, number 13, the magic system. There's an interesting change that often happens when you're adapting fantasy, because in a book you can describe something that's very conceptual, you can talk about a character's feelings and how they did something, but on screen things have to be very visual. So quite often powers get changed into something that just looks fantastic. For example, Matilda by Roald Dahl. In the book, her powers of telekinesis were not remotely as impressive. And at the end, when she levitated that piece of chalk to write a message on the board, that was her most impressive feat in the book so far, and it absolutely wiped her out. In the movie, she's flinging around people and furniture and doing all sorts of things throughout the movie, like she's Jean Grey, and it doesn't faze her at all. So that just shows how much they ramp up her powers just to give her this visual appeal to the audience, just to make it look good for the camera. And they did very much the same thing in Wicked. In the original books, the magic is much more analog. In Baum's books, magic is tied to magic words, magic items, magic spells. They come from something. You don't just have inherent magic that pours out of you. However, and even in the Wicked book by Gregory Maguire, Elphaba does not have this inherent magic that just pours from herself like she's a mutant in X-Men waiting to have her traumatic event that awakens her mutant ability. She's just, from the moment she's born, she's leaking magic in a very gratuitous way, making things move around. She's just born with this inherent gift of telekinesis. And yes, it's very visual, but it's also a completely different magic system from that which was established in Gregory Maguire's Wicked book or the original Oz books by Baum. Number 14, the scene transitions. I want to high five or hug or whatever, shake the hand of the people responsible for the scene transitions in this movie. I'm sure there were a great many people. For example, when the building turns into a scene in a pop-up book in that early part of the movie. And then another one when we're underwater and the fish are swimming underneath Glinda's boat and she has her hand in the water. Then we come up above water to be with her arriving at Shiz. There are some really creative and artistic ways of going from scene to scene in this movie, and I never tire of watching them. So well done to the people who were responsible for that. Number 15, the bully scene. When Elphaba is young and Nessa Rose is a toddler in her wheelchair and those bullies come in and tease them, it plays out very, very similarly to that scene in Frozen when Elphaba is playing with Anna and they're making a snowman. Both scenes end with a young girl who hasn't learned to control her magical powers, getting out of control and doing something that distresses her sister. Then the father comes along and says, "What have you done?" and makes the magical older daughter feel incredibly ashamed of herself. It's exactly the same. Their fathers even treat them the same way. Elphaba's father in Frozen... Did I say Elphaba? Elsa's father in Frozen is completely oppressive and just tells her to keep her powers to herself, which is just what Elphaba's father does in Wicked. Number 16. The witch burning in the spiral in Munchkinland is something that we see twice. Once in Wicked and once in The Wizard of Oz. Do you remember in the not in the opening scene, but in the first scenes in Oz, in Munchkinland, we see the Wicked Witch of the West first appear in a blaze of fire and smoke in the center of the spiral that begins the yellow brick road. And then we see a witch at the beginning of Wicked, again, in a blaze of fire and smoke in the center of the spiral that begins the yellow brick road. Don't you just love images that rhyme? Number 17, the opening titles. Although many people have pointed this out, I would be remiss not to point it out here, but because it was quite a surprise. I really thought they would use the modern Wicked logo that they've designed for the film, but that doesn't actually appear in the film of Wicked. When you see the title, it's in the same font and style as the 1939 Wizard of Oz. So that's a really wonderful way to tie them together visually. Number 18, the ruby slippers and silver shoes. In the original Wizard of Oz book, the shoes were made of silver and there was nothing particularly visually dramatic about them because they were being written about in the book. However, in the 1939 movie, they wanted something a little more dramatic and eye-popping to make use of the Technicolor, and as many people may know already, the silver shoes became ruby slippers to make the most of the Technicolor. However, that change was a trademark owned by the MGM studios, and Disney had to pay quite a bit of money to use ruby slippers in their 1985 movie Return to Oz. Even though they owned the rights to the Oz source material, they didn't own the rights to the ruby slippers because that was a specific change brought about by the MGM creative process. However, Wicked doesn't have the luxury of that visual consistency, and so they have to draw from the original Wizard of Oz book. That's why there is this beautiful pair of ornate silver shoes, but they've gone about as far as they can by putting them in a case that is all bejeweled with what looks like rubies. And there's a little Easter egg during Popular when Glinda pulls out a pair of what is essentially ruby slippers. So that's about as far as they could go, and it was fun having those little moments. Number 19, the witch's green skin. This is almost a contradiction of the previous point, because another change brought about by the 1939 MGM Wizard of Oz film was that they gave the Wicked Witch of the West green skin. However, they couldn't really trademark green skin in quite the same way, and the image of witches with green skin became so common that I don't really know if there was anything they could do about that legally. So there was nothing stopping Gregory Maguire from using green skin in his depiction of Elphaba in Wicked, and here we are. Number 20. You may notice that early in the movie when Glinda says she doesn't care what people think, Elphaba disagrees with her, and this is echoed later in the scene in the Ozdust Ballroom when someone says that Elphaba doesn't care what people think of her, and Glinda says, of course she does. She just pretends not to. Number 21. They turned Elphaba into a grammar... I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word. They turned Elphaba into a grammar Nazi, and I absolutely love that. She corrects Glinda twice, including that very common corruption when people say, I could care less. I'm so happy that Elphaba corrected her. She is a woman after my own heart. Number 22. The image of the wizard. As you can see in the picture of Oscar Diggs, which depicts the wizard, and even in the stone facade that you'll see in a slightly later scene covering the image of the animal founders, the wizard is shown looking very much like his original illustrations from the Oz books, with a high collar and long jacket tails and a minxy sparkle in his eye. Number 23, Professor Mombi. Some of you may have noticed the Easter egg in the roll call at Shiz University, which reminded me very much of those scenes from Hogwarts when they talk about the teachers who were there. They mention Professor Mombi, Professor of the Biological Arts. Anyone who's seen Return to Oz will know that Mombi is a witch. She was also a witch in Emerald City. She is the villain in Land of Oz, the second Oz book. And so it's interesting that they said there were no other magic users in Oz, because we all know that Mombi is a magic user. So I suspect she's getting up to a little bit more in her office than playing around with biological arts. Maybe that's something for the sequel. Number 24, Michelle Yeoh. I've heard some people express dissatisfaction with the changes she made to the character, who in the stage show is much more brash and bold and harsh. But I quite like the emotional nuance that's possible in a film that brings us close to these characters and lets us see them in closer detail. We can see their tears, we can see their expressions. And I think the softer delivery that Michelle Yeoh brought is quite appropriate. She brought a seductiveness, she brought an allure, she brought a maternal quality, and that the maternal figure is something that Elphaba never really had in her life. Of course, she lost her mother when she was young. So Madame Morrible playing that maternal character who is gentle and kind and soothing is really appropriate. And maybe she didn't have the strongest singing voice, but the first time I saw Wicked at the Gershwin Theatre on Broadway, Rue McClanahan was playing Madame Morrible, and bless her heart, she couldn't sing a note. She spoke every single one of her singing lines. So Michelle Yeoh was pretty good in my books. Number 25, A Slight Gulch. You may have picked up that little Easter egg when Miss Coddle is speaking to Elphaba and she says just a slight gulch. Of course, Gulch is the name from The Wizard of Oz of the woman who we see first carrying Toto in a bicycle. Miss Gulch is the human equivalent of the Wicked Witch of the West, so of course it's appropriate to use that here. Later on, we also see another connection to that character when Elphaba is seen riding a bicycle with the lion cub in her back basket, but we'll refer to that a little bit more closely at the time. Number 26, Elphaba's outburst. When she loses control and throws her sister up in the air and the wheelchair and the seats move around, it is a spectacular display of power, but really it seems a bit unfair. I mean, you think she would have sent the other people up in the air. You'd think maybe she would have sent Miss Coddle up in the air, not her sister. She was told to keep Nessa Rose safe, so the first thing she does is send her flying up in the air to protect her from someone else. Honestly, like, Elphaba's powers were really a little bit counterproductive at the time. Number 27, the talking animals. In Gregory Maguire's Wicked book, he distinguishes between talking animals and non-talking animals by giving the talking animals a capital A and the non-talking animals are in lowercase without a capital. Of course, you can't show that in a musical or a movie because it's something you can only do when you're looking at a word. So that can make the discussion a little bit trickier to write. The moment when Elphaba's outburst smashed the facade at the university and the wizard crumbled away to reveal the original painting of the animal founders, I think according to the notes I took, there was a goat, a raccoon, an owl, and a bear. That displays not just the presence of animals, but animal dominance. It's not just that animals were teaching at the university, all of the founding members were animals. Does that mean at some point in the history of Oz it was completely controlled by animals? Were humans an invasive species at some point? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. You know what we're like. But that scene really reminded me of the one from Thor Ragnarok when Hela destroys the facade that Odin has put over the original painting, showing the true history of Asgard in its real past of bloody conquest and bloodthirsty violence. Number 28, the wizard's folly. We don't see them around quite so often these days, but follies were very popular once upon a time, and there was a period when making these fake ruins was very much in vogue. Sometimes they incorporated water features, but they were often built in parks and gardens. Often around Europe you can still find them. There are some wonderful follies in the main gardens in Vienna, for example. But at any rate, when Elphaba walked into the folly that contained the big face of the wizard on the wall, I mean, really, we were just looking at Jeff Goldblum's giant face, and there were quite a few giggles in the theatre. I don't know if it was like that for you. Tell me in the comments. Did people laugh when they saw Jeff Goldblum's face carved in stone on the wall? Number 29, the coloured glass mobiles. There's a moment in The Wizard and I when Elphaba is moving around the Shiz University set piece, which really, to their credit, actually looks a bit old and dusty in places. It doesn't look shiny and polished like the Emerald City. So I really like that sense of past and history that they managed to put into that very freshly created set. And in this grotto of mobiles, there are all these hanging pieces of different coloured glass. And of course, every time a piece of red glass casts its shadow on Elphaba's face, it kind of neutralizes the green tone of her skin. And so, in perfect timing with the line about being degreenified, we do actually see the color of her skin neutralized so that it almost looks like her normal human flesh tones for a moment. And that's just a beautiful interplay of the set design and the lyrics and the overall themes of the show. Number 30. Anyone who's read the original books or seen Return to Oz will know that Oz is surrounded by a rectangular desert called the Deadly Desert, and you cannot set foot on it without turning to sand. It's really only possible to cross it magically, such as in the third Oz book, when Ozma and her company travel over it using a magic rolling carpet, or in the sixth Oz book, The Emerald City of Oz, when the Gnome King and his villainous allies dig a tunnel underneath the Deadly Desert to send their invading army into Oz. It's just not something that you travel over in a carriage or that you walk over. It's not possible. And that's what we saw when Elphaba was singing the crescendo of The Wizard and I. She runs through the field up to the cliff's edge, and we see this desert yawning before her. It's the same desert in Return to Oz, and if anyone went down there and touched it, they will turn to sand. Number 31, the lighting issue. There's been a fair amount of complaint about the colour palette and the saturation and the lighting in Wicked. Although I did notice a little bit of light flare at times that could be distracting, that slightly washed out feeling was actually quite consistent with Gregory Maguire's tone in the books. And it didn't bother me quite so much. I guess subconsciously it actually fitted with what I remember from the Wicked Years books. And I would be interested if anyone else who is a fan of those books feels the same way as me. I didn't really want to see a garish and brightly coloured Oz. I wanted to see an Oz that was a little bit more grounded and had that realistic tone of the Wicked books. Number 32. What is this feeling? Ariana Grande was absolutely hilarious, and in her songs, she just made every single line pop with every bit of humour that you could possibly put into it. And I don't remember that line about I can't hear your guesses because this is a letter. I think that was added for this, and I love the way that they found something that could strengthen every song in the soundtrack. There's not one song in the new Wicked soundtrack that is weaker than the original version. Not to cast any disrespect on what Idina Menzel, Christian Chenoweth, and everyone else did back then, but it's just that the new soundtrack builds on that foundation and makes everything even superior to what we've enjoyed for the last 20 years. Number 33, Ariana's comedic beats. I was very doubtful about her before I saw this. All I knew her as was a pop star, and boy did she prove me wrong. Like many of you, she was a standout performance in the film. I don't think that she outshadowed Cynthia Erivo by any stretch of the imagination, but people have been talking about her a little bit more just because she was funny and people like to be entertained. Number 34, Hip Hop Glinda. Apparently, the creative team wanted to add a hip-hop twist to Popular to make the most of Ariana Grande's vocal stylings, and she had to veto it and said to them, no, I do not want to play Ariana Grande playing Glinda, I want to be Glinda. And good on her for making that call. It's a little bit worrying when your hired talent is a better steward of the material than the creative team responsible for putting it out there, especially when that creative team contains Stephen Schwartz, the guy who composed it. And he wanted to put a hip-hop twist in it. That really worries me, but thank God for everyone chipping in and being a voice of reason. Number 35, the combat costumes. There's a blink and you miss it moment during What Is This Feeling, or the song that everyone wants to call Loathing, in which Glinda is in a sporty pink short dress and Elphaba is in a long black gown with a bright blue sash around her midsection. That's what's built into the dress, I guess. And I'm really sorry that those dresses didn't get a little bit more screen time, because they were a fantastic look and they were an example of how much effort was put into these really small moments in the film. But if you were to pause them and pay attention, everything in it has been done beautifully. Number 36, the Underground Animal Meeting. This was an addition from the stage musical. Of course, they couldn't depict animals in the same way that they can with CGI, so Dillamond is really the only animal beside the lion cub that appears in the Wicked stage show. And this is a good example of how the small additions that they made to the Wicked movie just made it possible for them to flesh out the story in a much more satisfying way than the limitations of a stage show can make it possible for us to do. Number 37, Bowen Yang as Fanny. I have loved Bowen Yang on Saturday Night Live for quite some time, and although he's not exactly a student, I'm going to forgive that because he was very, very funny here. And the moment when he interacted with Fiyero and gave that very, very fluttery, breathless response, it was just perfect. Perfect. 5 stars to those moments. Number 38, the library. Of course, you couldn't depict the library on the stage like many of the other things they added. That set piece was created for the film, and I'm so glad that they put so much effort into it and made it such a feature, because that is possibly one of the best libraries we've ever seen on film since Beauty and the Beast, with those, huge bookshelves that I don't know if anything can really compare with, but round bookshelves that revolve. I mean, that was just genius. And even later on, there were round bookshelves, and it's all very evocative of the round clockwork cogs and the round clock faces. It's a theme here. And that means that the joke about rare and medium rare books was written for the film as well. Number 39, Fiyero and the Librarian. After the number of true crime videos I've been watching lately, I feel rather uncomfortable about Fiyero seducing this elderly school librarian and her being so okay with it. I mean, I know this is a dance number and it's just choreography, but still. Did anyone else feel mildly unsettled by that? Number 40, the Ozdust Ballroom. This was depicted very much like the Oz equivalent of a African American jazz club back during the segregation era, because of course animals are used as a theme, analogous to racism and segregation and the oppression of minorities. We see here the animals who are allowed to thrive underground in a place that's somewhat illegal, we're told, and in the Wicked book, the Ozdust Ballroom is actually something a lot more graphic. I think it was called I blocked it out of my mind, some kind of philosophical club or society, but at any rate, it was a lot more seedy and played out a bit like a cross between a cabaret show and a ditty freak-off. I'm pleased that they turned it into a much more family-friendly affair here. Number 41, Bok's surname. It's a bit on the nose, but they gave him the surname Woodman, and in the library scene, if you pay attention, you can see him carrying a book that's called How to Fell a Tree. Number 42, Forbidden Corn. One of the books that we see in the library that Fiyero was carrying is called Forbidden Corn. It's very clearly a romance novel, and so I have a couple of questions. First of all, what is a romance novel doing in the school library? And secondly, why is it called Forbidden Corn? And I guess I have a third question. Do I want to know what Forbidden Corn is, or do I not want to know? Number 43, book titles. Another book we see here is the Book of Biological Arts, which is beautifully designed, and I suspect if we were able to see more of it, it would turn out to be written by none other than Professor Mombi. Number 44, remarkable. I mean, really? When Elphaba levitates the coin in Madame Morrible's office, Madame Morrible's response is one of awe and wonder, but that's nothing compared to what she saw Elphaba do at the beginning of the film. I mean, her introduction to Elphaba was seeing her raise an entire person in the air in addition to a wheelchair, and she pushed things around and chairs were moving around, but now she's impressed with a single coin? That's nothing. And really, is that about as far as Elphaba has got in all that time of tutoring? I mean, I thought that she's been getting these private tutoring sessions from Madame Morrible. So how is it that in all of that time, she's only got as far as levitating a coin? And even that was only achieved because Madame Morrible tricked her into getting angry. So something's not quite right there, but let's just not analyze it too much. But, I mean, this is the house of overthinking, so I'm sorry, not sorry. Numbers 45 and 46 go to the same person, Bowen Yang. Each of these lines deserves its own entry. When Bowen says he's going to lose what's left of his mind, I could hear that any number of times. And number 46, we have to go rouge our knees, made me laugh so much. I actually got the giggles in the theatre, and I had to really pull myself together or I was going to kind of ruin the movie for myself. But rouging our knees, we have to go rouge our knees. I'm going to remember that and use it with someone I really disrespect. Number 47, permission structures. This film makes a really interesting point about permission structures. In the Ozdust Ballroom scene, everyone's mocking Elphaba because that's what they think they have to do. Well, not they think what they have to do, but that's what everyone's doing. So like sheep, they're just all joining in. They only change when Glinda changes, and Glinda, as the most popular person in the room, creates a permission structure for them to change their response to Elphaba. Not one of them would dream of celebrating Elphaba or copying her dance until Glinda gives them permission to do so by setting that permission structure in place. They're not actually deserving of any credit here. They haven't changed or become better people. They're not really kinder to Elphaba. They're just copying the most popular person in the room who has changed the nature of the permission structure. Number 48, Elphaba's vulnerability. Some people say that moments in the movie drag, but I didn't feel they dragged at all because every scene that was drawn out and given a little bit more time to breathe was able to put so much more emotion out there. And that scene when we saw Elphaba crying as Glinda was dancing with her, I mean, I was bawling my eyes out both times I watched this in the cinema. I don't know about you, but the silence of it even made it so much more heartbreaking and raw. And I suspect I will always cry when I watch that scene. It's the equivalent of the scene in Maleficent where she loses her wings. It's always going to get me. Number 49, the rhyming lines. This, of course, is the scene that I mentioned earlier when Glinda says that Elphaba does care what people think about her. She just pretends not to. Number 50. We're almost halfway there. Glinda's change of heart. The emotional depth to really sell that was something I didn't think Ariana Grande possessed, but to my delight, she surprised myself and many others. She'd really been playing the character like a cross between Cher from Clueless meets Elle from Legally Blonde, and I like that very much. But there was a depth of emotion to her Glinda that went far deeper than either of those characters could ever have dreamed of doing. Number 51. Glinda's surprising moments of depth. She does have moments when she really knows what she's talking about, such as the scene when she tells Elphaba that although something might be her secret, that doesn't make it true. She's quite correctly pointing out that we may have our narratives, but they're not necessarily real. We have the things that we say about ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. But even though they may be secret, personal, and deeply emotional, they may not necessarily always be true, and it does pay to let other people shine a light on them because we are often unable to do that ourselves. Number 52. Lyrics being changed in popular. They gave Elphaba a little bit more to do here, because after the line when it says, "Did they have brains or knowledge? Don't make me laugh," Elphaba completes the line by saying popular, which in the original soundtrack is just sung all the way through by Glinda. And in the original, Glinda then says, "Please, it's all about popular." But here, we have Glinda saying right in response to Elphaba. So it just plays out a little bit differently. Number 53. Another lyrical change in popular was that when she says, "I'll teach you the proper ploys when you talk to boys, little ways to flirt and flounce," in the original, she says, "Ooh, I'll show you what shoes to wear." But here, she points at Elphaba's shoes and says, "Ew, I'll show you what shoes to wear." So it's changed from Glinda saying, "Ooh, I've got a great idea, I'll help you with your shoes," to, "Ew, your shoes are disgusting, I need to help you with them." And it worked. I liked it. Number 54. The song changes. I don't think there's ever been a musical adaptation in which there was not something done to the music that people didn't really like. It's quite often difficult adapting a show that people love quite so much as Wicked, but they didn't add songs to it. I know they're going to do that for the second half, but they didn't do that here. There was a small sequence added to One Short Day, but it worked. Every song was improved, strengthened. I know I've already said this in this video, but I think it deserves its own point. It needs to stand on its own, that every single song in the soundtrack was stronger and built on the foundation of the previous one. Number 55. Glinda's comedy. Watching that scene in Popular when we watch them from above and Glinda is pushing herself around Elphaba by her feet, I could watch that any number of times. That is physical comedy at its best. Number 56. That's a choice. The scene when Glinda was teaching Elphaba to toss her hair is right out of the stage show. But the line when Glinda says, "That's a choice," is added. And I'm not sure it's going to age terribly well. It's one of those lines that will probably be a bit cliched and corny in not too long. And it may be like when you watch sitcoms and you hear a line like, "Well, that happened," and it really ages the show, and it's certainly not funny to hear anymore. So let's see how we feel about "Well, That's a Choice" in a few years' time. Number 57, the wand and the ball gown. Also the scene in which Glonda. Can we please have a character called Glonda? Can someone make a character called Glonda? I think I've just come up with something amazing here. When Glinda tries to use her wand to make the ball gown, it's very silly and funny, of course. And, really, she wouldn't disrespect a wand by throwing it behind her like that, but it makes us laugh, and she does exactly the same thing in the stage show. It's probably the silliest thing that Ariana really does in this role. Generally speaking, she brings a considerable deal of dignity to it compared to some depictions I've seen of Glinda. You really wouldn't think that a wannabe sorceress would entertain such childish notions about magic, but, who's to stand in the way of good comedy? Number 58, the end of popular. In that fantastic crescendo, we hear Ariana going up a key change twice, which is something that doesn't happen in the original. The original has Chenoweth reaching the end of the line, and it ends fantastically. But in another one of those very creative embellishments to the movie soundtrack, Ariana is given the chance to show off. And I am so glad that they let her do it, because how many of us didn't love that change? Is there anyone who didn't like it? Tell me in the comments, and I'll try not to judge. Number 59, the narcotic poppies. In the stage show, there was no hope of having levitating poppies floating around a classroom, so when Elphaba's magic goes wild and puts everyone to sleep, it's just accomplished using lights and everyone collapsing. I loved the effect that they had here, and it was a very nice foreshadowing, because of course poppies are used later on in the Wizard of Oz by the Wicked Witch of the West to put Dorothy and the Cowardly Lion, at least, to sleep. Glinda wakes them up with snow, and it's all very cute. In the original book, poppies were just part of the landscape, and they had nothing to do with the witches. When Dorothy and the lion fall asleep, they're rescued by some field mice who pull them to safety on a cart. So, things do play out a little bit differently. Number 60, Echoes of Miss Gulch. When we see Elphaba riding the bicycle with the lion cub in the back, this is a direct callback to Miss Gulch riding her bicycle at the beginning of The Wizard of Oz. Many people have pointed this out, but I did enjoy it so much I have to say it myself as well. Number 61, Elphaba touches Fiyero's cut. Well, it's really just a scratch, but after the lion cub scratches Fiyero's forehead, there's this line of blood right here. And in a supposedly romantic moment, Elphaba reaches out her hand and touches his scratch. That is so unsanitary. The only reason why you should be touching someone's wound is if you have magical powers and you intend to heal their wound with the power of your touch. But considering Elphaba did not do that, I really want to know what possessed her to reach out and touch his scratch. She's playing rather fast and loose with such things, considering they live in a world without antibiotics. Number 62, Madame Morrible's weather magic. This is another great departure from the sort of magic system that they have in the Oz books, where the magic requires spells, magical items, magic incantations, that sort of thing. You need to use magic to create magic. You don't just have it inherently in you and it doesn't explode out of you like Elsa's powers explode out of her in Frozen. And when we see Madame Morrible change the weather, she just reaches out her hand and she doesn't say anything. She doesn't do a spell. I really would have liked them to do something a little bit more with that moment. But we got what we got. Number 63, Glinda's token gesture. The way that Glinda changed her name in solidarity for Mr. Dillamond was just classic white saviorism, making these token gestures that don't actually help anyone at all, but they sure make them look good and give them lots of credit. Number 64, the slowest train departure ever. That train platform was not very long, and from memory the train took up most of it. So they really got something about the time progression a little bit wrong, because when the train started going, Glinda waves goodbye, running down the platform, and then Elphaba looks down at her Emerald City brochure and has a little think about it. The train's still going. Elphaba tells Glinda to join her. Glinda's still running. They argue about it. The train's still going. Then Glinda catches up. The train's still going. They have a chat. She jumps on. And it still hasn't left the platform. I mean, by this time, the train should have been, well away from Shiz University, but no, it's still going. This is the house of overthinking. I will try not to apologize for being extremely pedantic. Number 65, the Emerald City. The way it's been designed and depicted makes it clear that this is all very much a new build, and it's contrasted a lot with the age and history of Shiz University, which, as I pointed out before, has been shown with dust and dirt and crumbling edges, which really, really not improves, but deepens the aesthetic of the show. Number 66, Animals in the Emerald City. I was surprised that, considering the Emerald City is a hotbed of anti-animal activity and the wizard is having them taken away, the Emerald City is a very dangerous place to be a talking animal. So there's a considerable number of talking animals floating around the Emerald City, and they're walking around with clothes and apparently participating in society without experiencing too much prejudice or trouble. So I found that a little bit curious. Number 67, Dina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth. I did not expect to see them here. I don't know if any other people got spoiled for it, but it was a fantastic surprise. Their dresses were amazing. They created the perfect roles to let them be in this show without upstaging the new cast, and it really gave it a sense of emotional completeness. If they hadn't been in there, I wouldn't have noticed, but the fact that they were, it was a little bit of, extra icing on the cake. When the wizard is reading from the Grimoire, he says, Omaha, Omaha. And of course, the people don't realize he's just saying the name of one of the states near where he lives in the United States of America. They think he's reading magic words from the Grimoire. And that is actually a bit closer to the magic system that we're used to seeing in Oz, where magic comes from the use of words and items. Number 69, the Hammerheads. In the One Short Day song number, you can see these creatures who kind of don't really have any necks. They just go from legs to heads. And they have also been used in the stage show quite a bit. They are from the original Wizard of Oz book. They are a species that are encountered by Dorothy and her friends when they're journeying from the Emerald City to Glinda. The Hammerheads cause them quite a bit of trouble. But more to the point, what's interesting about that is that in the book, Glinda doesn't come to the Emerald City, no. After everything goes wrong and they find out that the wizard is a fraud, Dorothy and the Scarecrow, the Lion, and the Tin Man have to travel all the way to Glinda's castle. So they've just traveled from the Wicked Witch of the West's castle to the Emerald City, and now they have to travel all the way to the southern border of Oz to see Glinda. So there's a lot of trekking. There's more walking in the Wizard of Oz than there is in the Lord of the Rings, but thank God there's a lot fewer poems. Number 70, green glasses. One design element that's completely missing from the stage show is the green glasses worn by inhabitants in the Emerald City. And I know it's not necessary for them to be wearing emerald glasses because that plot point comes from the original Wizard of Oz, when the Emerald City wasn't even made of emeralds, it was actually white. Everything that they thought was green was actually just a plain white, but the wizard was tricking everyone because he made everyone wear green glasses so that everything looked green. And that kind of plot might work with a 4-year-old, but most people recognize that you take off your glasses at the end of the day, and you would find at some point the ability to look over the edge of your glasses and see that the world around you is not green, unless the wizard is fusing the glasses into your face. So even L. Frank Baum himself, I think, realized how silly that was, because in the second Oz book, he just completely retconned all of that, and the Emerald City all of a sudden was made with real emeralds. And I'm not sorry about that at all. I think they really improved it. However, I do wish they'd put some green spectacles on people in the Emerald City because it just looked great. It was a fantastic part of the costumes, and I don't think that they should have put them on Elphaba and Glinda, but it would have looked great on some of the rest of the cast. Number 71, the soldier with the green whiskers. You can see a number of soldiers in the One Short Day scene who have a green beard, and there is actually a character in the original Oz books called the soldier with the green whiskers. It's not just a random aesthetic choice. Although, from memory, I think there was only one of them, and they've kind of cloned him here. Number 72, a guest appearance from Stephen Schwartz. The first time I watched it, I noticed that the guard who said, "The wizard will see you now," sounded a little off. It wasn't the sort of voice that they would normally use to deliver that line, and it wasn't delivered in the usual way. I thought, it's a strange choice. The second time I watched it, I paid a little more attention to that guard, and what do you know, that's Stephen Schwartz. That was his guest appearance where he got to say one line, so I guess we can forgive him for not sounding like the usual cast member. Number 73. Nobody gets to see the wizard. I found it a little bit strange that in Wicked people talk about going to see the wizard, and the wizard clearly has a habit of letting people in because he scares them with his head and has to find out that it's actually Elphaba in front of him before he lets down the facade. However, in The Wizard of Oz, the guard says nobody gets to see the Great Oz, not nobody, not no how. So I don't quite know how they marry those two things, but let's not think too deeply about it. Number 74, Belinda. Having the wizard call Glinda Belinda was fantastic. I think they added that for the film, and I liked it very much. It's a perfect demonstration of the sheer contempt that they have for Glinda until she becomes useful to them. Number 75, the yellow brick road. Having them choose the colour of the yellow brick road was very cute, but I shudder at the thought of how close we came to having a green brick road. Number 76, Madame Morrible in the Emerald City. I have a little question. How did Madame Morrible get to the Emerald City? We know that Elphaba and Glinda went there by train, but Shiz University is all at the edge of the border of Oz. You wouldn't imagine there to be too many train departures there to the Emerald City every day. So did Madame Morrible sneak onto the same train with them and arrive in the Emerald City at the same time? Or did she take a later train and just arrive then? Because something's a little bit fishy about that. Number 77, the Grimoire's design. I don't think I've ever seen such a cool book design. I wasn't expecting the Grimoire to look that great. It certainly looks a hell of a lot better than this Grimoire that you can buy, although I do love this. I really want that other Grimoire. I need it. Number 78, the winged monkey computer graphics. I know there was some criticism of the CGI in this film, but there were other moments where it was really well done. I mean, the transformation of Chistery and him growing the wings, the way that feathers were flying around in the air, it just made it look dirty and messy and biological, which I really appreciated. And the heaviness with which Chistery fell to the floor and hit the stone, I mean, I felt it. There was nothing cartoonish about that. Although it may have been computer generated, it really got under my skin. Number 79, the winged monkeys. In the original Oz book, The Wizard of Oz, by L. Frank Baum, the Wicked Witch of the West doesn't create the winged monkeys. She just has the ability to call on their services 3 times because she has the golden cap. The flying monkeys were a species who existed in their own right, but they were enslaved by an enchanter and put in the service of anyone who owns the cap. It's a little bit more like a genie granting 3 wishes kind of situation, because once they've granted your 3rd wish, they fly away and you can't use the cap anymore. Number 80, Madame Morrible as villain. I really loved the turn from Madame Morrible as a caring figure into a very villainous one. It happened seemingly suddenly, but we're led to believe that she's been on that path for quite some time now, and it kind of seems a little bit obvious when you look back at it. But that scene where she claps her hands and addresses the monkeys is fantastic, and the slow walk when she's basically turned into the wizard's lieutenant, that was excellent. No notes. Number 81, the hot air balloon. This was quite a surprise for fans of the musical because, of course, they can't really put that level of action into the stage show. That was a segment that they created to expand the climax and make it a bit more action-packed, and I don't think anyone was mad about it at all. It was a real thrill to be able to see them try to escape using the same manner that brought the wizard to Oz in the first place. Number 82, the Wicked Witch. Although there's no change from the musical to the film when Madame Morrible speaks over the loudspeaker and calls Elphaba a wicked witch, There's something about the film and its ability to get up close to the performer that makes that scene so much more emotional. You can see the look on Cynthia's face of that label sinking into her soul. You can see that identity being placed on her whether she likes it or not. And you don't get to see quite that level of emotional nuance in the stage show. So I really loved the ability to get up close and to see what was really going on in Elphaba's mind. Number 83, Defying Gravity's expansive set pieces. There's only so much you can do on a stage to make things pop, and so the movie, of course, can do so much more. We get to see the palace, we get to see the Emerald City, we see the heights of everything, and it really makes the action that much more dramatic and visually impressive. I, I would encourage anyone going to see the stage show after this to temper their expectations for the visual spectacle, because there are things that we can enjoy in the film that you just cannot recreate in a theatre. Number 84, The Wicked Witch is Born. When Elphaba becomes a witch, that scene is so much more impactful because of, again, the closeness that we have to the character and the slow sweep of her cape. I mean, that is some of the most impressive cape work we've seen in a long, long, long time. And her becoming the image of the character, the archetype she's just been cursed with, it's just some of the most beautiful character development I've ever seen. Number 85, the falling scene. The scene when she falls out of the tower and she loses her grip on the magic broom and she sees a vision of herself in the window, that was like something right out of an MCU film. But it kind of worked. It did expand and kind of break the momentum of Defying Gravity, and I wasn't quite sure how I felt about that. But the second time I watched it, I kind of liked it a little bit more. And it doesn't offend on quite the same level that the gaps in the end of the song do, but more on that in a moment. Number 86, impressive cinematography. There's a really blink and you miss it moment in Defying Gravity where you see a very zoomed out image of the tower and Elphaba some distance away, just hanging in the air, confronting them, and I just want that framed on my wall. Pay attention when you're watching Defying Gravity, because that scene passes very quickly, but it's absolutely stunning. Number 87, escaping the winged monkeys. In the stage show, well, at least when I saw it at the Gershwin Theatre, they actually had the monkeys flying out over the audience. There was a fair amount of aerial work. I think for a lot of productions of Wicked, they just have the monkeys climbing the background of the set, but at least when I saw it, the monkeys would swing out over the audience, and it created a really interactive element that I don't know if everyone gets to experience that now. Number 88, Defying Gravity and Losing Momentum. There is a moment in the end of the song where she starts flying up singing Unlimited, Unlimited, and I really don't know why they added that. I know they needed to create some gaps so that they could show the impact of the conflict on the other characters and all the rest of it, but I just can't say that I love the way she went back to the original, to the song we know. She goes, Unlimited, Unlimited, nobody in all of Oz. And it's just a strange, I don't know why they did that. Why does she start singing Unlimited, change her mind, and then sing Nobody instead? It feels like they cut the song and then spliced a couple of ends together. Not a big fan of it. When you listen to Defying Gravity on the soundtrack, this is one of the only moments that isn't as strong as the original. One of the only moments. Number 89, Hungry Eyes. There's a moment when it's obvious that Elphaba's going to turn into an Oz equivalent of a terrorist, and that the wizard's not going to be able to access her magic or use her as a mouthpiece for the people at all. And Madame Morrible, ever cunning and Machiavellian, looks at Glinda and realizes that she has in front of her the perfect mouthpiece for their propaganda. And the look on her face, it's just so cunning, and you know what she's going to do. She looks at Glinda like she's going to eat her up. Number 90, the electrical storm. The way that Elphaba flew up out of the Emerald City and shorted out the entire electrical system was exactly the kind of drama that I was hoping that they would pull out of their sleeves. I wanted to see Elphaba cause some real damage when she was flying away. I wanted Defying Gravity to feature something like that. And they gave us Elphaba blowing the whole city's power grid. So, yeah, well done, Elphaba. Well done. Number 91. A slower Defying Gravity than we're used to. I return to my feelings about the end of this song and the tighter crescendo that they have in the stage show. It really is the weakest point of the soundtrack in this film, and the climax isn't quite as heart-racing as it should be. A lot of people have commented on this. I know it's not just me being fussy, and it's a tragedy when they've managed to improve everything else, but the climax of the movie's best song, I really don't know what they were thinking. It works a lot better when you're watching the film than when you're listening to the soundtrack. And I just hope that through successive watches, I will reconcile myself to it. But they drag out the end of Defying Gravity and they give it these continual crescendos and climaxes, kind of reminiscent of the way The Return of the King kept having an ending after ending after ending. 92. The animated Defying Gravity. There's an animated storyboard version of Defying Gravity, and to be honest, I think you should watch it. There's a link to it in the description, and I really feel that this actually captures the momentum of the climax of this song a little bit better. So have a look at it, see what you think of the visuals in that. Number 93. Totalitarianism in Oz. There actually is a kind of autocracy in the original Oz books, except that it's the supposedly good characters controlling magic. So there are no magic users in Oz allowed, except for Ozma and Glinda. They are the only ones who are allowed to practice magic. And the wizard is allowed to practice his rudimentary spells that were taught to him by Glinda. And Ozma, of course, is only able to practice magic because of the magic belt that was given to her. And she needs to have an object to do magic. She's much less powerful than Glinda, but the fact that the only people allowed to do magic are the ruler, her lieutenant, and her friend just goes to show there is a form of fascism in Oz, but it has more to do with sorcery. Number 94. Militarism in Oz. Although the wizard's military tactics are implied here by his desire to use spies, and I'm sure we'll see more of it in the second movie, their military plot is much heavier in the original Wicked books, particularly in Son of a Witch, the sequel, which is a very strong anti-war story, to the detriment of the actual book's narrative. It didn't really feel like it wanted to be an anti-war story, but that's what Gregory Maguire gave us anyway. Number 95. Toto speaks. You may wonder why, if there are all of these talking animals in Oz, why doesn't Toto talk when he gets there? And the answer is that he can talk. In Return to Oz, Billina the chicken can talk as soon as she's in Oz, and it's exactly the same for Toto. We find out in the 8th Oz book, TikTok of Oz, at the very end, he has been able to speak the entire time, he just didn't feel like it. Number 96. Sapphire City. I don't know where Sapphire City is, but there was a poster showing this location, and I really want to know more about it. You can't drop these Easter eggs about other locations in Oz and then not show us Sapphire City. And Sapphire being blue would have to be a city in Munchkinland. So if Sapphire City is in Munchkinland, why is there a greater metropolis than what we saw in the film? Anyway, I'm just going to stop, otherwise I'll unravel the entire thing. Number 97. The same theme. There's a theme running through The Wizard of Oz and Wicked, which is exactly the same, and that is always look for the man behind the curtain. In The Wizard of Oz, you learn that he's a fraud and that what he presents himself as is not who he actually is. And it's the same with the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion. The Scarecrow presents himself as brainless, but he's not really. He's actually quite smart, and he helps strategize and save them at certain times. The Tin Woodman presents himself as heartless, but he demonstrates his love for Dorothy on many occasions. The Cowardly Lion presents himself as cowardly, but he's actually quite brave and plucky when it comes down to it. And Elphaba is presented as the Wicked Witch, but of course behind that you see that she's really quite different. So the moral of the story is always look behind the curtain. Don't take people for what they present themselves as. Wait a little bit. Look behind the facade. Find out who they truly are. Number 98. New songs. Although I liked that they didn't add new songs to this soundtrack, they're going to have to do it for the second one, and I gather they are writing new material. Because things are shorthanded a little bit, we're going to have to see an expansion of the storyline between Ness and Bok. We're going to have to see a little bit more around the circumstances of how certain characters come to be together at the end in certain places, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Hopefully they'll be drawing on the Wicked book to flesh that out a little bit. Number 99. Madame Morrible's Purple Magic. In the poster of Wicked, Madame Morrible is shown like an MCU character with these sparkly purple magic lights coming out of her hand. And it looks fantastic, but of course she pulled no such stunts in this film at all. When she changed the weather, you don't see any purple lights. That looks like something that you would have seen on Agatha all along. In fact, Agatha Harkness in the MCU has purple magic. It seems to have been established as the color of dark magic, which was also the case in The Dragon Prince. Purple magic is dark magic. And here, it seems that purple magic is also dark magic, at least in the poster, but I don't know if we'll get to see that in the second movie. I would like to imagine that Madame Morrible will be using her powers a bit more dramatically, and we may see some purple magic. It would put her in good company. 100. Jeff Goldblum. I'm very grateful that Jeff Goldblum did not Jeff Goldblum too much. Usually when Jeff Goldblums, we like it because we like Jeff Goldblum, but if he had Jeff Goldblumed the way he normally Jeff Goldblums, I don't think I would have liked Jeff Goldblum. Number 101. Oz has always been very, very feminist. To the people who think that Wicked is woke, I mean, it's really just in keeping with the original source material, because Baum was very much ahead of his time in certain ways. Not in others, but in the area of women's rights and feminist issues, I remain impressed with him. The power structure that was ultimately settled in the land of Oz was a very female one. You have Ozma ruling the land of Oz, you have Glinda ruling by her side, and then above them all you have the fairy queen Lurline, which is a little bit like the maiden, the mother in Crone. You have Ozma as the maiden, Glinda as the mother figure, and Lurline as the crone figure, this distant being kind of above and over everything. So I might have to do a video on that, but that is the final point that I will leave you with. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Please like and subscribe. I would really appreciate your support. And think about sharing this video. Tell me in the comments what you'd like to see in any more Wicked videos. I feel like the season isn't quite over yet, and I have a few more Wicked videos in me. So please join me for the next one. And as always, sweet dreams. Good night.